So far in the class, we've looked at the divisions of memory. We've discussed at length Atkinson and Shiffrin's modal model memory, which proposes that we have sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. We discussed this idea that short-term memory needs to be revised so that it's more dynamic. And so we now think of short-term memory as working memory, and working memory has several different components to it. And so we discussed the visual spatial sketchpad, the phonological loop, and the episodic buffer. Similarly, long-term memory, so this storage system that we have in our brain for information that we are not currently aware of, but that we might access in the future, long-term memory has divisions to it. And that's what we're going to discuss in today's lecture, and we're going to look at the evidence that we actually have that these divisions exist. And so this is just a figure that I literally pulled from the intro psych textbook that suggests that we can take long-term memory and we can break it up into declarative and non-declarative components. And the declarative system can be further broken up into semantic memory and episodic memory. The non-declarative system can be broken up into procedural memory, conditioned responses, and priming, associations between stimuli. And we'll talk a bit about each of these in turn, and we'll look at, how we know, why we think these divisions exist. And most of the reasoning here is based on neuropsychological cases, and we'll discuss some of those cases, but we also see evidence from functional magnetic resonance imaging studies that different types of long-term memories activate different brain areas. So we'll start by talking about declarative memory systems, semantic versus episodic. So how do we define these two types of memories? Well, episodic memories are tied to stories. They necessarily involve mental time travel of some sort, right? So think of the last vacation that you took. Think of your first day of university. That might not have been very exciting this year, unfortunately, but think about your last day of high school, for instance. To think about these events, these episodes, you have to travel back in time. Semantic memories, on the other hand, aren't tied to particular episodes. They reflect facts that you just know, right? You just know that Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. You just know that, the capital of British Columbia is Victoria. The capital of Canada is Ottawa. Those facts may have come from experiences initially, right? You may have traveled to Ottawa as a student and learned about, Canada's capital, but your knowledge of that information isn't tied to that episode. So episodic memories and semantic memories, memories of facts, fall into the declarative memory category, and we say that they're declarative because we typically remember these memories or talk about these memories using language. And that's why they're declarative memories. Do we see a distinction between episodic memories and semantic memories in the brain? Are they actually dissociable neurologically? Right? So are there patients who have suffered brain damage and they lose episodic memory, for instance, but retain semantic memories? Yes, we do have some examples of this. A very famous patient known as Ken Cochran suffered severe damage to his medial temporal lobes. because of a motorcycle accident. And he retained knowledge of facts. So, he retained fact-based knowledge, semantic memories not tied to episodes, but he completely lost his episodic memory. And this MRI image here simply shows, where in Kent Cochrane's brain the damage was. I guess the arrows are sort of pointing to it. Medial temporal lobe, so medial in the middle of the temporal lobes. So Cochrane was studied extensively by Canadian neuropsychologist Endel Tolvien at the University of Toronto. And we have some pretty good video of Cochrane. And so I'm going to play that for you now. And then after the video, I'll talk a little bit about, what we saw and how this provides evidence for a dissociation, a single dissociation in this case, because it's one patient, between episodic memories and semantic memories.
You liked cars and motorcycles, didn't you?
I guess so.
Did you own one?
I owned a motorcycle and a car.
You owned a motorcycle and a car. What make was your car?
Honda.
And what color?
Brown.
Did you ever have to have any problems with the car? Ever get a flat tire, for instance?
I think I had a crash with it, but I don't remember.
Had a crash with a Honda?
Yeah.
But you don't remember any flat tires. Do you know how to change a flat tire?
Yeah.
Can you tell us? Can you give us a sort of as detailed account as you can about how does one go about changing a flat tire?
Well, first you stop when you know it's flat.
Yes.
And then you go around back and open up the trunk. Take out the jack and the spare tire. And then you put the jack under the car and take the handle out of the jack, pump up the jack, and that raises the car. Then you take the socket wrench and take off the bolts off the tire and take the tire off and put the other tire on, put the bolts back on and take the jack down and you change the tire.
That's very good. How do you know how to change a flat tire if you don't know whether you've ever done it yourself?
It's just one of the things you know, I guess.
One of the things you know. You think everyone knows it? You think your mother knows it?
Yeah.
Has she done it?
I don't know.
So what did we see there? So Cochrane seemed to have knowledge of facts, right? He knows exactly how to change a flat tire. He can describe the process to you, but he's absolutely no memory of ever actually doing that, of ever actually changing a flat tire, right? So very nice example of a loss of episodic memory while retaining semantic or fact-based memories. Do we see the opposite case? There are some examples of cases where patients have brain damage and they have spared episodic memory and they lose fact-based semantic memory. So patient LP suffered an attack of encephalitis, and this left her with no semantic memory but spared episodic memory. She failed to recognize people, understand the meaning of words, and even recall basic facts like who is Beethoven. So you could ask LP about like, what did you do this morning? And she would say, oh, I made coffee, right? So she would recall that episode. But then if you said to her, how do you make coffee? LP would say, I have no idea at all. So this patient couldn't describe to you at all factual information. And so if we put LP and KC together, we have a double dissociation, right? And this is, as you know, if we're neuropsychologists, this is what we're looking for, because it suggests that episodic memories and semantic memories are dissociable in both the mind and the brain. So the mind distinguishes between these two forms of memories, and they also rely on different brain areas, right? So, you know, our classic X pattern here that we've seen so many times in this course, KC has spared semantic memory, impaired episodic memory. LP has spared episodic memory, impaired semantic memory. So a really nice double dissociation. Now we can also look at episodic versus semantic memories using functional neuroimaging. So in this 2004 paper that I believe is discussed in your textbook, Levine et al. Had participants make audio diaries describing, you know, personal events like a night out on the town. I think the description in the paper is of like one participant describes like salsa dancing. And then they also had to describe personal factual information, right? So how to make tea or how to make coffee. So you've got episodic memories in one case, you've got semantic memories in the other case. Put these participants in the scanner and have them listen to these tapes, listen to these audio diaries of themselves describing an episodic memory, a night out on the town, versus describing, you know, some personal fact-based piece of information, how someone makes coffee every morning or tea every morning. Record brain activity during both of these two tasks. Use the subtraction method, so you take brain activity associated with listening to an episodic memory versus listening to a semantic memory, and you subtract brain activity associated with episodic memories from brain activity associated with semantic memories. See if there's anything left over. Yes, there is. And so what this suggests, right, is that these two types of memories rely on different parts of the brain, rely on different neural systems. And so what you can see in this fMRI image here, the yellow areas of activation reflect brain activity that's unique to hearing an episodic story. The blue areas reflect brain activity that's unique to hearing a fact-based story. And, you know, where this activity is occurring, for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. The point is that, you know, it's happening in different brain areas. So episodic versus semantic memories seem to dissociate in both the mind and the brain. We've seen that with the neuropsychological patient evidence. We're seeing it here, right, with functional neuroimaging. So what's interesting about memories, episodic memories, is that they appear to fade with time and they actually become more fact-based. And so another way to distinguish between episodic memories and semantic memories is what's known as remembering versus knowing. Right? An episodic memory is something you remember. You remember that fun day at the beach. You remember that fun day at the amusement park. Right? A semantic memory is something you just know. You know where the beach is. You know what rides the amusement park contains. And those facts aren't necessarily tied to any particular episode. And so what we see is that episodic memories, as they age, they actually lose their episodic character and they become more fact-based. And we can see this using a procedure known as remembering versus knowing. So the researchers in this study asked participants, in this case older adults, about recent and older events. And the events ranged from 1952 to 2001. Right, so one historical event here would be like the death of John F. Kennedy. And participants in the study had to indicate if they remembered an experience associated with the event, so some sort of personal experience, whether they knew about the event but didn't associate any sort of personal experience with the event, and then finally whether they didn't know or didn't remember the event. And so, one example from my life, right, would be the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers in New York on September 11th, 2001. Right? This is an event that I both know about. I know the details of the event, but I also have a very clear episodic memory tied to this event. I first learned about the attack sitting in introductory chemistry class as a first-year student at Bishop's University in Quebec. And I remember, what happened throughout the day as I watched the coverage on CNN in the sort of common room of my dormitory. So this is an event that I remember and that I have a personal experience of. There's an episode for me tied to this event. And so what they found in the study was that, for older events that happened 40 or 50 years ago, participants were much less likely to remember a particular episode in their lives in association with that event. They remembered the facts of these older events, but these events that they had surely experienced had lost their episodic character. And so what we see is that as memories age, they move from being episodic to more semantic, to more fact-based. Right? And so we've all experienced something this year which is quite traumatic in a number of ways, right? The global pandemic. And that memory, which for you right now is very much based on episodes, right? You probably remember precisely what happened when you found out that, classes were canceled or moving online, or when you found out that you had to, quarantine and stay inside, and what you did and how this affected your sort of day-to-day life. Those episodes, as you age, will become more fact-based. And so these memories will lose their sort of episodic character. So one interesting idea about episodic memories is that they're important because they help us think about the future. They help us simulate what might happen in the future. And this is known as the constructive episodic simulation hypothesis. So we have this store of recent episodes in our brain because we can draw on these episodes to actually predict what's going to happen in the future and simulate future events. And if you took intro psych with me, you probably heard me talk about what's called prediction error, and this notion that the purpose of brains is to predict the future, and that learning is driven by prediction error. And prediction makes a lot of sense. We want to predict our world. We want to know where we can get food every day, where we can get shelter. This prediction is arguably a very adaptive thing. And so what's interesting about patient KC, Ken Cochran, who had no episodic memory, was that he couldn't imagine future events. And so there's some evidence there from neuropsychology that we draw on episodic memories to simulate future events. And indeed, if we put people in the fMRI scanner and think about past events and then have them imagine future events, we see that, very similar parts of the brain are active. So there's some evidence here that, the role of episodic memory one role of episodic memory is to allow us to think about the future. Kind of a cool idea, I think. So we've looked at some evidence suggesting that declarative memories can be broken down into semantic and episodic memories, and these two types of memories double dissociate. So we see a distinction in both the mind and the brain. And that as we age, episodic memories become more semantic, more fact-based in character. So let's talk about non-declarative memories now. So these are memories that we tend to not, talk about using words, right? So for instance, riding a bike. You don't have to describe that to yourself before you do it. You just get on the bike and ride. Walking down the street, talking. Understanding speech. These are all non-declarative procedural memories. How do we know that these distinctions exist in both the mind and the brain? So let's look at some evidence from neuropsychology. So HM, as you remember from the last lecture, severe anterograde amnesia due to damage to his hippocampus. Couldn't form new long-term declarative memories, but his procedural memory was fine, totally fine. And this was first shown by Brenda Milner at McGill, who worked with HM, studied him extensively, and she had HM do what's called the mirror drawing task. And the mirror drawing task is a motor learning task where you basically have to learn how to trace a star by looking in a mirror. And this is a very difficult task, right? Because, all your movements are reversed, right? If you want to move to the left, you actually have to move to the right. And what happens if you or I were to do this task, right? We would start out and we'd be very bad at first, and then over successive days, we get better and better and better, and we'd learn how to use this reversed visual feedback from the mirror to accurately trace a star. And HM showed the exact same pattern of performance. So just looking at this chart here on the slide, errors on the y-axis here, successive days, trials on the x-axis. At first he was very bad, made a lot of errors, couldn't really do the task. And over successive trials, he eliminated those errors and came to perform the task with a high level of accuracy. Now, of course, he had no memory, no declarative memory of these episodes of learning, right? So every time HM would sit down to do the mirror drawing task, Milner would say something like, "Do you remember doing this before?" And he'd say, "No, I've never done this in my life." But he'd be very good at it. He'd have that procedural memory, right? In the same way that HM could, learn how to do any new motor skill. In the same way that HM, remembered how to walk and how to talk, he had this procedural memory. So here we see some evidence, right, that the brain distinguishes between procedural memories and declarative memories. Another form of non-declarative memory relates to conditioned responses. So hopefully everybody remembers classical conditioning from intro psych. You can learn to associate a neutral stimulus with something in your environment. So for instance, you can learn to associate a light with a puff of air to the eye. So if somebody blasts air into your eye, you will blink. This is an eye blink response. Your body does this to protect your eye from damage. If you pair that puff of air with a light over and over and over again, soon you can present that light on its own and participants will blink. And I've participated in studies like this, and it's remarkable how quickly you learn this association. So within a few trials, you're seeing the light and you're blinking, expecting that air puff. And using a conditioning task like this, patients with anterograde amnesia have been tested to see if they can still learn to associate neutral stimuli in their world with unconditioned stimuli they already know how to respond to. And so in this particular paper by Waskrantz and Warrington from the late 1970s, they conditioned 2 patients with anterograde amnesia to associate a light with a puff of air to the eye. So eye blink conditioning. And sure enough, what they saw was that the patients learned this association, even though they didn't remember any of the training, right? Even though they had no recollection of, having this puff of air blasted into their eye and seeing this flash of light. As you can see in this plot up here, it shows the percentage of conditioned responses on the y-axis. After training, when the conditioned stimulus was presented on its own, which is how we test for classical conditioning, when the conditioned stimulus was presented on its own, participants showed the conditioned response. So they blinked in this case. So again, we're seeing evidence here that patients who can't form new declarative memories, they have anterograde amnesia, can experience and learn via classical conditioning. So this form of memory seems to depend on a different brain area. Finally, we come to priming. And priming is when the presentation of one stimulus changes the way a person responds to another stimulus. It's a form of associative memory. You experience something in your world, and this sort of primes you to respond to related things. And we often study priming using what's called lexical decision tasks. And these involve showing you a word, or I should say a string of letters, and asking you, is this string of letters a word or not? And you simply respond as fast as you can. Yes, it is a word. No, it's not a word. And what we see is that if you respond, to one word, let's say like tree, you're a bit faster to respond to related words that follow it, like leaves. And so this is an example of what we call lexical priming. And we think priming is a non-declarative memory, a non-declarative association. Let's run through an example of a lexical decision task. So regardless of where you are, I don't care if you're in the library, I give you permission to say word if the word is a real word, or not word if it's not a word. So here we go. Word, not word, 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 not word, word, word. All right, so hopefully the way these experiments work makes sense to everybody. The idea, right, is that in a class, in a lab-based lexical decision task, you're responding via a keyboard as fast as you can. So what we really care about are reaction times here. How long does it take you to find a particular word in your brain and decide, yes, this is a word I know, this is a real word, or no, res is not a word in my mental dictionary. And so if we just look at the results, imagine we did this study in the lab and we looked at reaction times, response times to each of the words I presented you with. We might get a plot that looks like this. So reaction time on the y-axis here. And what you see, sort of unsurprisingly, right, is that, the non-words that kind of look like words, it takes you a long time to say that they're not words, right? Because you're like searching your mental dictionary for this word res, and it's not there. So it takes you some time. But we see priming. So in the example that we just did, you saw the word date, you said it was a word, and then you saw the word date again, right? And you were a bit faster probably to say that it was a word because you'd been primed to think about that word. That word was already active in your mind. So this is called repetition priming. When you respond to a stimulus and you experience that stimulus again in the future, if the two events occur close enough in time, you'll actually be faster to respond that second time. That kind of makes sense. We also have what's called semantic priming, so priming by meaning. So here's an example of semantic priming. You probably said that sail was a word, and then you got the word boat. And you were faster to say that boat was a word because you had just said that sail was a word. So responding to sail, saying that sail is a word, activates sailing-related things in your brain, and it makes you a little bit faster to respond to the word boat. This is called semantic priming. And so we think this type of behavior, this memory, is non-declarative in nature. And when we investigate priming in patients who have amnesia, can't form new declarative memories, we see that they can still be primed. So in this particular study from the 80s, the researchers examined patients with Korsakoff syndrome. Korsakoff syndrome is caused by abusing alcohol. It's a deficit in a vitamin, thiamine, and it leads to basically anterograde amnesia. So this is one of the side effects of alcoholism. You develop amnesia. And so these patients can't form new long-term declarative memories, but they can be primed. So in this particular task, these patients viewed word lists, and then they were asked to do a word completion test. And so the idea here, right, is that, if you recently read the word bread and you see BRE and you're asked to complete that word, right, you're likely to complete it with AD. You're likely to make that word bread because you just saw the word bread, right? So bread is kind of primed in your brain. And this is effectively a form of repetition priming. And so what the researchers found in the study was that these amnesiacs, so these patients, these Korsakoff patients who couldn't form new long-term memories, they couldn't recall the words in the word list that they had viewed, so their performance on word recall was very, very poor, which is what you would expect. But these same words that they couldn't recall still primed them. So there was still this impact on priming from this material that they had experienced before. So it's kind of a really cool and counterintuitive finding in a way. You see this word list. You can't remember the word list when asked about it later on, but that word list still impacts your future behavior. So it's a really nice dissociation between a declarative memory, recalling the word list, talking about the word list, and a non-declarative memory, being primed by the word list. Very, very interesting finding that suggests quite nicely, right, that there's this dissociation between memories that can prime you and memories that you can talk about. Okay, we've come to the lecture review. What are the two main divisions of long-term memory? So hopefully everybody can get this. What are the two main divisions of long-term memory? Declarative and non-declarative. Question 2. Remembering is to knowing as blank memories are to blank memories. So if you recall, I said we can redefine two memories as remembering and knowing. What are those memories? So those memories are episodic and semantic. We can think of episodic memories as things that you remember, right? They're tied to episodes, events. Semantic memories are things that you know. And as we learned in this lecture, with time, episodic memories lose their episodic character. They become more fact-based. They become more semantic in nature. Question 3. What 3 types of non-declarative memories are spared in patients with anterograde amnesia? Question 3. What 3 types of non-declarative memories are spared in patients with anterograde amnesia? Procedural memories, conditioned responses, and primed responses.